introduction this morning. That was because I need to say those in order to bring us to the next 4 services. Not going to spend a lot of time in this passage, just this is an opening type of statement for this series. Look in Matthew chapter 16. You have verse 13, where we have Jesus asking the disciples a question. When Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, "Whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" And they said, "Some say that thou art John the Baptist, some Elias, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets." And he saith unto them, "But whom say ye that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ," that's the Messiah, "the Son of the living God." And Jesus answered and said unto him, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say unto thee, also unto thee, that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Then charged he his disciples that they should tell no man that he was Jesus the Christ. One phrase I want to focus on. We need a little background before and after, but one phrase I want to focus on. Jesus says, "I will build my church." It's a definitive statement by our Lord Jesus Christ. It's in the future tense at the time he writes this. I will build. And it is a very important statement. God is building his church. In the context of what we find here, Jesus has fed the disciples and 4,000 people with bread generated from 7 loaves, a miracle. He was pointing out to them that they must seek spiritual satisfaction not in earthly things, but in Jesus Christ. And that's why in that passage he says, "I am the bread of life." And John, he talks about that same thing. I am the bread of life. I've fed you, but I am the bread of life. I am what you need. The grace-hating hypocrites called the Pharisees, they didn't like that. They had an awful lot of interest in the earth, in the earthly, the sensual. And so he warns them to not fall into the trap, to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And immediately his disciples get mixed up and they turn around and say, "Oh, he's talking about leaven because we haven't eaten today. He just fed 4,000 out of seven loaves, and then he says, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees." And they say, "Oh, he's upset at us for not getting the food." He just fed 4,000. He can give a couple of disciples some food. And so that bothers Jesus. In verse 11, he says, "How is it that you do not understand that I spake it not to you concerning bread, that you should beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees?" Then understood they how that he bade them not beware of the leaven of bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Don't be like them. I'm not talking about bread that you eat. I'm talking about that which is spiritual. Watch out for their grace-hating philosophy. And this is a test to see if they're being spiritually minded or still ruminating on the physical. And so he asks them a question as they're walking. That's been in their minds. He said, "Okay, beware of the doctrine of the Pharisees." We got that now. Okay, we got that lesson learned. And then as they're walking, he turns and says, "Who do people say I am? Who do men say I am?" This is a test. Are you still thinking about that bread, or are you thinking about me now? Are you thinking about the ruminating on the gospel? You're ruminating on the truth. And Peter makes this bold, accurate declaration, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus tells him, "Peter, or Simon, that was great. But I want you to know, you did not come up with that on your own. Flesh and blood did not give that to you. My Father in heaven, he has revealed that to you." That's a spiritual statement, Peter. That's a divine statement. That's a heavenly sent statement. It's not earthly. The people of this earth can't understand that, Peter. And in a sense, this is one of those areas where Jesus is actually commending Peter. Where he's saying, "Peter, you got it right. You're thinking about the Spirit. You're not thinking about the bread anymore. You're thinking the right way. Keep going, Peter." Jesus describes more about what he will do, but before he does that, he recognizes Peter's astute statement, and he promises Peter a blessing regarding his willingness to recognize Christ's authority in person. He gives Peter a special blessing. And the special blessing is found in verse 19, not found in verse 18. The special blessing is that Peter would be the one responsible, the one that God would choose to use the key. What does the key do? It opens a door, right? Peter would use the key would have the key, to open the door of the gospel, the exact statement Peter made, that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, both to Jews and Gentiles alike. Peter was the one that God chose to preach on the day of Pentecost, where there were 3,000 saved, Jewish souls saved on the day of Pentecost. God also chose Peter to be the first individual to receive the vision that God has allowed the gospel to be to all nations, not just the Jews. And so Peter was the first person to preach to Cornelius, a Gentile. And so truly God blessed Peter in saying, Peter, I'm going to give you the opportunity to preach the gospel. You have the key. That's the key right there. To open the door up to all men, to all people, once I am God. And that's what it's talking about. By the way, it's not talking about that Peter is sitting up in heaven next to some big gates and you have to sign this registry as you get in, and St. Peter's up in heaven guarding the gates or something like that. That's not what it's talking about. The Bible talks nowhere of there even being gates in heaven. It talks about a gate in the New Jerusalem, but not in heaven. So all the jokes are in error. Believe it or not, the jokes aren't right. But he does something interesting here. He says, thou art Peter, which is the Greek word Petros, the masculine. Well, Peter's name is masculine. It means rock, stone. And then he says, and upon this rock, but he uses a different word. Well, same word, different gender. Thou art Petros, the rock. And upon this Petra, I will build the church. He's not referring to Peter there. If he's referring to Peter, he wouldn't call him by a feminine name. He's referring to the Petra. In almost all languages where you have masculine and feminine type endings for words, Spanish is that way, and Greek is that way, and Hebrew, there are a lot of languages like that way. We are not that way in English, and it kind of sometimes confusing to grade schoolers when you're learning the English language. In all these languages, almost always, things to do with the earth are feminine. We kind of do that ourselves. Mother Earth, we talk about nature as being a she. We do that naturally in our language too. So literally in the Greek, what he's saying is, thou art Peter. You're a good stone, Peter. That was a good statement. You're a rock. But upon this cliff, this giant land mass, this Petra, that's what I'm going to build my church on. Which, of course, the giant land mass is not Peter himself, but what the stone said. Upon this rock I'll build my church, is upon this statement, the reality of Christ, the Messiah as the Son of the living God. That's the foundation of building the church of God. It's not built on a man. It's built on the person of Jesus Christ. We sang that song this morning, the church's one foundation is Jesus Christ her Lord. Well, this phrase, this response of Jesus is amazing. I will build my church. He gives Peter the blessing that Peter would be responsible to open the door of the gospel to Jews and Gentiles alike. And by the way, Peter would also share in the wonderful privilege of dying like Jesus died. He would be crucified for opening the door of the gospel up to others. Peter, the cussing fisherman, was the one God was using to open the door of the gospel up to all nations. Maybe He can use us. Maybe we have some purpose, huh? That's the one He was using. But look back at the divine promise. Jesus Christ came for this purpose. And this purpose alone is why He came. Understand something. An individual is not saved by a church. But souls are saved to the church. God does not intend Christians to be born again and to live without the called out assembly of the saints. The church doesn't save us. Church doesn't save us. But we are called to the church. God is building His church. Not just saving souls and randomly let them be out there. He is saving souls and putting them together in the called out assembly. God is building His church. I've given my life, and I will continue to give my life to the church of God, not just to be a traveling preacher to preach here or preach there or any other places. But one of the reasons why I'm a pastor, and I hope to be a pastor until the day I die, is because Christ is building His church, and I want to be involved in what Christ is building. I want to be on His crew, His building team. I want to be a vessel that He can use to build His church. Why must we be devoted